Okay, so welcome back to the Canadian Gunboat Behind the Vault Door. We've got a number of different hot topics that have come up lately. I'm going to warn our viewers and listeners now, put the kids away, because this is definitely not going to be kid-friendly. We've got some serious things to discuss. Canada is completely outraged, and I can easily see why. I'm one of them. The Omar Khadr payment of $10.5 million, or the suggested payment of $10.5 million, because nobody really knows how much it is, because the government's keeping it a secret from us, is going to be the topic of today's discussion. Ordinarily, I would like to have different guests on the show from week to week. We're going to be doing this once a week. We're going to be delivering the podcast either Sunday night or Monday morning. I would like to have different people from week to week. However, since this topic is such a highly contested one, since people are so jacked up over this, I couldn't help myself. I had to come back to Brian, because I know you're going to have some strong opinions on this subject. Brian, your first thoughts on this subject are what?
Yeah. Well, I would just be silent for quite a while about it, because the thoughts, they're very difficult to get out with just sort of devolving into angry diatribe. I mean, it's one of the greatest embarrassments and betrayals to both the Canadian people and certainly to our service people that has happened in this country in living memory, for sure.
Absolutely. And you know what? I'm going to stop you there for a second. For the people that haven't been keeping up to speed, Omar Khadr was a very young man when his parents took him out of this country, and he had decided, or his parents had decided, to take him overseas. And throughout his stay there, he engaged in the practice of building improvised explosive devices. He engaged in acts of terrorism. He's a confessed murderer, and it's known now that he is responsible for the death of a military medic, a U.S. military medic. And all this, of course, has been known for some time. But what wasn't known was that the Canadian government had reached an agreement to pay him the sum of $10.5 million, or the suggested sum of $10.5 million. We don't know if that's the exact amount for sure, because, of course, the government's unwilling to confirm that. They're hiding behind some form of legal obligation to not share that until the books become opened up to the public in their regular fashion. But I got to tell you, hearing some of these things have made me absolutely livid. For several reasons. We've got a number of different issues going on here. I hear a lot of people saying that his rights were violated. Once he was captured, he was injured, he was brought to Guantanamo Bay and was mistreated somehow, and found himself in a position where the Canadian government at some stage was aware of his presence there, and I'm not sure if they left him there for some period of time, or if they in some way, shape or form denied him his basic human rights or Canadian rights, and as a result, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that his rights were violated at some point, and the Canadian government, in its infinite wisdom, decided that they were going to grant him this large sum of money before the outcome of any kind of legal case, making them pay the money. They decided to pay him out secretly, and it wasn't until a government leak divulged the information that we found out about it. In fact, I'm told that the check was already cashed, really not leaving much opportunity for the widow of the soldier, the American soldier that was murdered, to recover any portion of it. Even though there's a clear case in the United States where a judgment leveled against him in the amount of $100+ million. There's going to be no opportunity. That money's gone. That guy's gone. I mean, and the Canadian public is just outraged. I've never seen this kind of activity online the way I have now. For the first time ever, I think that we're going to see perhaps a cohesive movement, and I'm hoping one that results in people demanding at a large scale for the resignation of Justin Trudeau. Brian, your thoughts on this payout? What are you thinking? I'm dying to know, because I could see it just seething under your skin. It bothers me that people might paint angry, Canadian citizens as having perhaps poor impulse control when they discuss a topic like this. But you know what though? Why wouldn't you be like just freaking angry?
Well, I mean, I'm completely outraged, obviously, as a former soldier and as someone who has lost friends in Afghanistan, and certainly seen many of his friends come home without their legs and their arms and horribly disfigured or mentally ill from the stresses and horrible things that they saw and did over there. To me, there are several very huge indicators here. And the very first thing I want to say to everyone listening, I don't care if you're left, middle, or right of the political spectrum, you should be doing everything you can do to get every single person you know not to vote Liberal in the next election. That's first and foremost. And even before the Khadr issue, there are serious concerns about the way this government is running the country. The endless deficits and unrestricted spending. Again, the promise was made $10 billion a year for infrastructure spending. That's not what happened. We've gone $30 billion over without the benefit of without the situation of a recession on the go. $30 billion in deficit spending on so-called infrastructure, of which there is no infrastructure. The money is going who knows where. There's no auditing of what is happening to this money. The money is being stolen and wasted, in my opinion. And it is just an opinion. But even if you're a Liberal, you need to be looking hard at this government and saying, what the hell is going on? That's first and foremost. So my immediate reaction to this is par for the course, and it reaffirms my enthusiasm for garnering a movement to get these people out of power. And I want everyone to understand that this is not going to be that difficult. The Liberals like to paint the last election like it was a landslide victory for them. They took a lot of seats, but the way we elect our governments, first past the post, means that the person who garners the most number of votes in a riding wins that seat. This last election had the largest number of seats decided by less than 5% of the vote in Canadian history. So many seats were very, very close. They were within 5%. Now, that 5% can account for people who wanted to see a change, some people who didn't like Stephen Harper, certainly people who wanted movement on the marijuana issue, and certainly people who wanted movement on electoral reform and that kind of thing, and the appeal to youth. So you ended up with a lot of university students. You ended up with a lot of First Nations people who were sick and tired of the lack of movement on their issues. And certainly, I think a lot of Muslims in the inner city became concerned with the tone of so-called anti-Islamic rhetoric that was going around. But I want to emphasize to you that that this tone or this rhetoric was driven by our fake news in Canada, which is the CBC, CTV, Global News. 90% of the media in this country leans left to hard left. And in any case, they were being funded by foreign sources that were demonizing the Conservatives. I will say the Conservatives did not run a decent campaign in the last election at all. Almost as if the light had gone out and the desire to be running this country had sort of left them, because it was a very lackluster effort. And what's really concerning is that Liberals are what Liberals are, and they're always the same, and it's very difficult to move them. But the NDPers, the leftists, they abandoned their party wholesale. Whereas the Conservatives lost about 200,000 votes, the NDP lost well over 1 million. And that's where the Liberals gained their traction, and that's how they won these seats. So in the next election, if you're NDP, vote NDP, because at the very, very least, we cannot ever, with this guy, have another majority government with Justin Trudeau as the head of it. It just can't happen.
Yeah, I'm completely on board.
So that's my first takeaway from this issue with Omar Khadr is that we need to get these people out of power as soon as possible. Yep. So that's number one. Gotta make that a priority. That's where I put all my anger. Yep. Okay.
Absolutely.
Now we can talk about law till the cows come home. And the fact of the matter is I hear a lot of people on both sides of the story expressing extreme viewpoints, left or right, and I have had those extreme viewpoints myself. The fact of the matter is I'm not a lawyer and I'm not a judge, and we can talk about the finer points of law. I can tell you that I don't, if in fact what happened with Omar Khadr, if this settlement is legal and they feel, some judiciary feel that this is fair, then we need to change our law. Yeah. That is the motivating factor. The fact that he was able to, that he was brought back here by a government, by Stephen Harper's government, actually, was brought back here by Stephen Harper's government, who didn't want him, and nor should they, because he's a completely, this circumstance has a complete lack of merit. I don't care that he was 15. I don't care that he was incarcerated. His crimes dictated that he should be incarcerated.
Absolutely.
The fact of the matter is Al-Qaeda is at war with ISIS right now. So if he was still in Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and was captured by ISIS, chances are we'd be seeing Mr. Khadr enjoying a little bit of ISIS's treatment in a video.
Yeah.
We'd be watching how ISIS treats their captives.
Yeah.
And we'd be watching Omar Khadr get what's coming to him. Yeah. That's fact one, okay? Yeah. So the fact that we negotiated with the U.S. government, that the U.S. government treated him, and I don't care that some liberals or leftists think that they were tortured or anything like that. This is not a conventional war. And what faced our captives when they were captured by Al-Qaeda or by ISIS or by any of the other extremist groups was far, far, far worse than what these fellows went through at Guantanamo. And, the fact of the matter is they put them in Guantanamo for a very specific reason. They did not want them to see the mainland United States, and there were several legal reasons for that. One was they are subject to different laws, but second, if they claim refugee status, they're entitled to be considered for it. So they didn't bring them back to the States where they could do that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Omar Khadr was a Canadian citizen. He was tried under the judicial system that the Americans set up to deal with unlawful combatants, because it's a new sort of niche for criminals. They're military criminals is what they are. And when I hear people yammer on about the Geneva Conventions, they don't understand that the Geneva Conventions were predominantly designed to deal with uniformed armies fighting under the established international legal accords. These people don't follow those accords.
Yeah, they haven't really kept up with the times.
And the fact of the matter is, this is like two football teams on the field, and one is following all the rules and running up and down the field, and the other's doing whatever it wants. They can pull a gun out and shoot you in the face while they run down the friggin' field with the ball. And we criticize ourselves for not following the best rules.
No. You know what? I'm going to stop you right there. I'm going to say we don't criticize ourselves. We allow people to convince us, right, that we should be or could be criticized for our behavior. We got to change our mindset. Right, if we're going to win this thing, right, we're going to have to approach it from a completely different angle.
We are not going to win this.
We're not going
Let's
to win
be
this.
very clear here.
Absolutely.
There is no sscenario under which the way we are addressing the world's problems right now are we going to win this. Nope. And I will point out to you that the Americans had trouble fighting the cartels for a long time. And you have some experience of this.
Absolutely.
Fighting the drug war is ridiculous. And, it's...
chasing cockroaches with a flashlight.
Absolutely. And the fact of the matter is, the first thing we need to do is figure out what we really need to prohibit and what we really need to not. Because the less things there are that are banned and prohibited, the less things there are for people outside of the legal sphere to profit off it.
Absolutely.
Okay. So there... But the Americans had trouble fighting some of the cartels, and I won't get into any names, but what they did was they ended up hiring a bunch of ex-rebels who were not beholden to any set of rules. They hired them, and they used them as a proxy army to fight the cartels. And for the first time, the cartels were terrified. They were absolutely terrified because they weren't fighting law enforcement. They were fighting people who didn't follow rules. And all of a sudden, they were being faced with their own their own sort of tactics, and so and they were defeated. And we don't need to talk about which cartels they were, but they were defeated, and that cartel is now gone. Yeah. And the leader is gone.
There's no question that there has to be a shift. All right, there's going to have to be a shift in the mindset. There's going to have to be a shift in tactics. And I'm glad you brought up the Islamophobia subject, which is one that I got to get myself calmed down a little bit. I mean, I got jacked up just like anybody else hearing about this news, and certainly I've been reading my fair share in social media what's going on. I mean, I take everything with a bit of a grain of salt, but I mean, ultimately, the idea that we would engage in a payout before this thing sees the inside of a courtroom, I think first of all it sends a very incorrect message to the world, what Canada's all about. We are not, and I repeat this. I don't know anybody. I don't keep company with anybody. I don't know a single intelligent person of good nature that would be in any way, shape, or form supportive of terrorism and or engaging in the acts of terrorism or building of explosive devices. I don't care if you're 15 years old. If you're capable of building a device that can indiscriminately take lives, you're capable of being tried as an adult, as far as I'm concerned. I don't care if you're conditioned, all right? I say that the minute that you, all right, engage in those kind of practices, those kinds of activities, you should immediately lose your Canadian citizenship. I mean, there is nobody that should be allowed to be welcomed into this country. Certainly not anybody that should be paid $10.5 million after they've engaged in such practices. I mean, it's despicable. And I don't know that the rest of the world should see Canada that way. But certainly if, and a lot of people are talking about it, they're saying that, we would have lost another $10 million just fighting it. And so this was a practical move for the government. It was a cost-effective move for the government. One, why would you keep it a secret? Two, I'll tell you why. Because nobody would be supportive of that. And if it was going to cost us an extra $10 million, I'd say it was worth it. I'd say it was worth it.
Absolutely.
Worth it just to fight it. Even if it was a losing battle, fight it on the off chance you might win. You may get, a judge, right, that would see it, right, for what it is. There's some morality issues here that need to be certainly thought of before you engage in a $10.5 million payout. Even if you lost the extra $10 million. In this day and age where our government seems to be throwing money, billions of dollars at a time by the fistful, in all directions without much thought, let alone transparency. I don't know where the money's going.
It's arrogance.
It is arrogance. And I mean, all of this, the Islamophobia laws, right? I mean, when was it that Canada suddenly became a bunch of racist bigots? I am not a racist person. I am not a bigot. I'm the polar opposite of that. And yet, this government somehow manages, with a straight face, to get in front of the podium and tell people that they are wrong, that they have been thinking incorrectly for years. I don't know when this movement occurred. I know it certainly hasn't taken hold of my life. I'm not a bigot or a racist, but I'll tell you something, all right? I have a real problem with terrorism. I have a real problem with people that might chop your head, away from your shoulders because you may disagree with them. I think that for the idea that, I mean, this is something that, I've seen just recently, the very idea that you might be tossed off the top of a roof head first as an act of mercy for, perhaps making the mistake of having the incorrect sexual preference. I don't know how Justin Trudeau can go to Pride Parade in Toronto and wear socks, right, his halal socks, and claim to be supportive. Right?
Well, I mean, again, let's. There is an inherent white arrogance in his whole behavior. He was at Pride going, happy Pride, and Allah is happy with all of you and all that. And I'm like, listen, man. You right now are disrespecting a great number of Muslims with your carryings on, and there is an arrogance and certainly a cultural superiority implied in his behavior that demonstrates a great deal of ignorance about what is contained in the Quran and what is common practice among our Muslim brothers and sisters. And I am not pro-Islam, but I'm also not anti-Islam. I believe that people should feel free to worship how they wish.
Absolutely.
However, you're not going to change my country. If you wish to worship that way and you wish your country to be organized that way, then go live in one of those countries. Don't come here and change mine. And they came here not to change our country. They came here to get away from what was bad about those places.
Yes.
So why would you then want to turn our place into those places?
Or something that resembles it,
right?
And like again, like I just keep coming back, to the Pride Parade, and I mean I don't know how he didn't get lynched. Like I certainly have a number of friends that are gay, and I've met a number of people that are gay, and over the course of my lifetime, and they're, and I say they, I mean like I hate to refer to people that way, but I mean the people that I've met seem fairly intelligent, right? They're absolutely fantastic people. If they can't see through, right, this government, and more specifically Justin Trudeau's effort to pander to the Muslim communities, who clearly in many ways fundamentally have thought processes that certainly run contrary, right, to the gay community or LGBT community. Like I mean, it's frightening to think that he could show up at that thing and with a straight face say he's supportive of what they're doing, and at the same time, be supportive of some of the radical Muslim activities, which have a grounding in the law.
Mark, the only thing I can suppose is that perhaps he's trying to increase the integration of the two communities to foster. I mean, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt, to foster, a circumstance of understanding, an environment of understanding and tolerance for both those groups. Muslims tolerating gays and gays tolerating Islamic conservatives. Yep. Because let's be very clear here. Muslims are not liberal. They're conservatives.
Yes.
They are conservatively minded. And we lost a lot of their votes in the last election. And we lost those votes because, again, foreign influences and our own hostile fake news, CBC. If people don't realize that CBC is fake news, I can't help you. Yeah. I can't help you. Because by all means, listen to CBC, but take everything they say with a grain of salt and understand that it's coming from a particular ideological viewpoint. You are being fed information to understand the world through a certain prism, and that prism is leftist. You got to remember that our communist intellectuals that came out of our universities in the 80s, the 90s, and the early aughts, who made their way to the CBC, are feeding you an ideological line. And you need to listen to Jordan. There's a fellow, his name is Dr. Jordan Peterson, and he's a teacher at U of T, and he is not a conservative, and he's not a liberal. He is a psychiatrist, and he's a very, very intelligent man, and he's very well spoken. And what I really enjoy about him is that he forces you to look at how you're receiving information, and certainly how you are breaking down the logic to have your understanding of the world. And he rips apart what is going on right now in our universities, our centers of learning, and in our media. Like, he just goes after it because it is so unfair to any person of any political leaning to be fed lies. And, the fact of the matter is, 1984, Brave New World, those things have come to be. We are living in 1984 and Brave New World. And the thing is people probably don't realize which way it's gone. The right side of the political spectrum is now the new counterculture. They are the classic liberals. The right is the classic liberalism. Belief in freedom, believe in liberty, believe in libertarianism, belief in human rights, believe in freedom of speech. That is all held sacrosanct by the right side of the political spectrum. I'm not talking about the extreme right. I'm talking about the middle ground where the so-called progressive conservatives used to hang. The left, the liberals, have skewed far left, and they have turned their back on logic. And now they are almost completely wrapped up in partisan illogicality. It's a jumble of illogical nonsense on the left side of the spectrum. That's not to say there isn't dumb stuff on the right. Of course there is. Yep. Of course there is. To all my leftist friends out there, of course there's nonsense on the right. But to paint the United States as overrun with the KKK, there's probably 5,000 members of the KKK in the United States. But extremist, intolerant, left-wing haters in the U.S., including Black Lives Matter and some of these other groups, you're probably looking at 1 million, 1.5 million people out there who are smashing down buildings, setting fires, murdering police officers, carrying on like this, and walking around with ISIS flags at universities. The same people calling for equality, gay rights, and all this kind of stuff are carrying ISIS flags at universities.
It's crazy.
No, it's more than that. It's obscene. And the days of us mindlessly, peacefully, and sort of in a non-aggressive manner tolerating their nonsense and their tantrums, those days are coming to an end.
Yeah,
we're not.
I see it.
When you see people brutalized in the streets because they choose to carry a Canadian flag, or they choose to carry an American flag, or they choose to wear a "Make America Great" hat again, "Make America Great Again" hat, and then they're brutalized and beaten to the ground while the police stand and watch. Well, I'm sorry. Why are we paying taxes?
Yeah.
What this is a free country for who?
Yeah.
You know.
And at this point, I'll stop you for a second, and I'll just say this. Certainly, we are definitely, just to echo your original sentiments, we are definitely in need of some change. Right? The idea that we would allow the things that have been going on, right, in Parliament to continue unchecked, things like refusing to answer questions of ethical conduct, right? I mean, Justin Trudeau repeating the same nonsense, right? I'm glad to work with the ethics commissioner. He won't answer if he's met with the ethics commissioner. He won't answer, if he's met at all, 0 times, 1 time. They couldn't get a simple number out of him in terms of an answer to a very serious question that people deserve to know, right? The Canadian people, right, have been duped, in my opinion, into believing that this is all okay, that this is part for the course, that politicians have always lied and done things that were shady and have engaged in backdoor politics. Like, the thing that bothers me the most is watching Canada sit idly by while all this goes on. And so now I'm thinking to myself, this could be the defining moment, right, where there's that change. I see so many people so unhappy with this recent decision. I ask all those people to look at what's been going on, right? The grotesque expenditures, right? The complete lack of accountability, the dodging of questions in Parliament, the majority government taking full advantage of the position that they have to just ram things through unchecked. I mean, this is the part where I would ask, right? People step forward. Come alive, people. Wake up, Canada. It's got to happen now. We cannot allow this to continue. We can't allow this government to continue to drive our economy into the dirt. We can't allow them to continue to embarrass us on the global stage. Right? I mean, something's got to change. Something's got to happen soon.
Well, as I said, I am satisfied that this government was democratically elected, and that democracy is still the best system we have to maintain stability, to maintain order, and to maintain peace. And therefore, and people need. I've heard some threats being made, and I've heard, I've heard all that, and the rise up or whatever. And okay, great, but the issue is right now we still have a democratic country. It keeps us peaceful. It keeps us at a decent standard of living. Although to be fair, that standard of living is declining while our taxation goes through the roof, and our money is wasted. And again, I've never had a problem paying taxes. I have a problem with my tax dollars being wasted.
Yeah.
That's my problem. So we still have democracy, and therefore I believe that every single person listening to this needs to convince someone else to convince other people, because we need to create a landslide of people. And if you're left of center and you believe in the NDP, then vote NDP in the next election, because that will at least guarantee that the Liberals will not get a majority. And there is some truth to the fact that Andrew Scheer is very similar to Stephen Harper in many ways, but Stephen Harper was unfairly demonized by media and by foreign influence, which included Hillary Clinton's campaign and the people that were backing Obama, and that includes Avaz, LeadNow.ca, and a number of these other groups that were funded by George Soros,
Yep.
who is funding liberal organizations around the world. A foreigner, against Canadian law, did this. Millions of dollars poured into this country and influenced our last election. I think the Conservative Party maybe knew it, and they knew that they were outspent by foreign influence, and they weren't going to win this election no matter what they did. And, it does bother me that it devolved into stupidity and talking about, barbaric practices and all this kind of nonsense. Because, as I said, many, many Muslims vote conservative. They're fiscal conservatives. They're social conservatives. Incidentally, I am not a social conservative at all. I am not.
No.
I am a fiscal conservative. And I'm a social libertarian is what I am. And I like that.
I can see that.
And, I like that Stephen Harper got elected one way and then actually ruled from a very center position, and he kept a great deal of discipline on his party, and people don't understand why that was necessary, and I do, because the Conservative Party is very disparate. It's very broad-based, and you have hardcore right-wing social conservatives, and you have almost borderline liberals. In fact, there's a lot of liberalism in the progressive conservatism of the old days, which combined with Stephen Harper's Reform Party to create the Conservative Party of Canada. So Stephen Harper ran the ship with a very, very tight fist, and he kept people in line. And here's a thing I want everyone to consider, okay? If anyone stepped out of line, Stephen Harper fired them from the party. He cut all ties to them. When Mike Duffy stole money from the Canadian people, Stephen Harper not only fired him from the party, he told him to pay it back. And when he couldn't pay it back, he said, pay that money back to the taxpayers. I will not have thievery in my party. And unfortunately, Nigel Wright wrote the check, which came from his money, which went to Mike Duffy, which has it has bad optics to it. But the fact that people are upset over $90,000 and they don't care about $50 billion going out the window in Ontario to questionable windmill deals and energy deals, from which the Liberals personally profit, and they do personally profit from these deals, right? Kathleen Wynne's brother-in-law sits on the board of 3 major wind concerns in Ontario. So
I was not aware of that.
that's right. $50 billion in wasted, stupid, useless green energy projects
That nobody wants to look at.
That nobody wants, and frankly are not green.
Yeah.
And that's the big thing for me, okay?
Yeah.
Because as a conservative or as a libertarian, I'm a big supporter of cutting down pollution and of being responsible with the environment. Huge, huge supporter of those things. My issue is that these people swallowing the CBC lies, the CBC party that shills for the Liberals, right, and makes excuses for them and allows them to fleece this country, steal money out of the pockets of natives, do under-the-table deals with unions, and does all these things and carries on like a corrupt bunch of mobsters.
Yep.
Makes excuses for them and convinces our liberal brothers and sisters, many of whom are quite altruistic and have the best hopes for our country under the skin. That's what they want for this country, but they cannot see beyond the fact that they're being lied to and their pockets are being picked as they go along. And that's why I lean conservative, because yes, the Conservatives spent money, yes, they do business with oil, yes, they do a lot of this stuff, but our answer to environmental issues isn't more batteries filled with toxic elements that have to be mined in conflict regions, and it has nothing to do with producing electricity that is 100 times more expensive than natural gas or oil through windmills. It has to do with us saving power, storing power properly, using it when it's needed, and not using so much. It's not about a tax, the so-called carbon tax, which is going to tax everything and drive up prices, and then we'll go back into general taxation dues, right? It's not going into some fund to help the country stay green. It's going into general tax income.
It's getting pretty frightening. On the taxation front, it's getting pretty frightening in this country. I continuously hear Justin Trudeau saying that he's lowered taxes for the middle class.
He's a liar.
And
he's a liar.
Of course,
liar.
Right, of course, it's a monstrous shell game. They're
taxing taxes.
They're taxing taxes. It's crazy. But the idea that he would have the nerve, right, the audacity to say that he's increased the taxes on the wealthiest 1% and he's lowered the taxes on the middle class and all the hardworking people that are wishing to join it. I mean, I've heard that saying so many times. It's absolutely ridiculous. He's finding new ways to tax people every day. He's coming up. He's taxed the air.
How is it lowering taxes to lower income tax by 1 or 2%? And then increasing every other tax by 5 or 10 by creating a carbon tax on everything, which they then get to apply HST to. We're taxing the tax.
No, it's the same kind of mathematical genius that says that the budget's going to balance itself. I mean, it's either a complete lie or you're stupid as hell. I mean, I can't find any way that a logical person would get behind, right, this kind of intelligence level, which is horrible.
Remember, Justin Trudeau is not the engineer behind all this stuff. Justin Trudeau's not doing this. This is Gerald Butts. This is Justin Trudeau's primary advisor. His primary advisor, Gerald Butts, was also Kathleen Wynne's primary advisor and Dalton McGuinty's private advisor on energy issues. So that's Justin Trudeau's best buddy and the guy who has the same authority as the prime minister. In day 3 or 4 of the new government, Justin Trudeau gave Gerald Butts the same authority to carry out activities behind the scenes as the Prime Minister himself. In other words, when he went and told someone something, it's as if it was coming from the Prime Minister's mouth. So I don't want to hear about how Stephen Harper was an autocrat and he ran a fist of steel through the government and the PMO's office was all this, because it's exactly the same with the Liberals. Exactly the same.
Well, I'll tell you the difference. We had a surplus. Right? We had a surplus, right? Like that good kid with a paper route that saved his pennies. We had a surplus when the Liberal government arrived. Now where are we?
Well, you know what? To be fair, Stephen Harper spent way more money than I would have liked to have seen him spend. Okay. It's true. He increased the overall debt of the country huge. He had a huge deficit for a couple of years in the middle of a recession. And let's remember that when Stephen Harper started, his government was a minority government, and he had to have the support of one of the other parties to get anything passed. And one of the agreements he made with the NDP was, I will start deficit spending in order to stimulate the economy while we are in deficit. And he did that with the support of the NDP. And the NDP said, if you don't do this, we will bring the government down with a confidence vote. And again, all politicians want to stay in power. So Absolutely. Stephen Harper wanted to stay in power, and he agreed to do that. So he did go into massive deficit spending. However, when he started and when he finished, they were out of deficit spending, and they were starting to pay down the debt. They also had created a couple of laws that forced oversight onto payments to First Nations peoples and payments to unions, because those two places involve an awful lot of questionable spending. And the issue isn't that natives aren't entitled to the money that the government gives them. You're damn right they are. They are. But Stephen Harper's point, and one of the things that they investigated when they were trying to figure out how much money was necessary to properly run and to fund First Nations, was that so much money was being lost to graft and theft by First Nations peoples that the money wasn't getting to the people who needed it in the communities. Yep. And it was Native activists, Indigenous activists, that demanded some oversight to this. And when Stephen Harper gave them auditors, the people who wanted to hide the stolen money started screaming racism. Well, this is racism. Stephen Harper, we need more money, and what we got was auditors. Well, a lot of Indigenous activists knew damn well they needed auditors, and they were thrilled to have them. And finally, people were seeing, wait a minute, we're getting lots of money. Our band council's stealing it. Our chief is stealing it. Our friends of the chief is stealing it. The money's not getting down to where it needs to be. And other nations realized, wait a minute, the money's being properly spent. We do need more for certain things. However, it created a bit of trust between certain First Nations groups and the government. And the first thing Trudeau did when he got back in was shut that law down, the Transparency Act. And it hides payments to unions. And unions are advocating for the Liberal government because unions are predominantly infiltrated by communists. And that's where the communists of the old days went. And I mean, people are going to start saying, "Oh my God, you sound like you're coming out of the 1950s," and blah blah blah.
You know, I'm sure somebody's going to accuse you of having a tinfoil hat on at some point during this conversation.
This is where the communists end up. And there is nothing more contemptible or hateful or worthy of denigration or contempt than a communist.
Absolutely.
Because they will take from the people who produce and give to the people who do not, to bring everyone down to a common level of poverty. And there is no one escaping free market economies, democratic countries, to go to communist countries. They aren't doing it. People don't get on rafts made of empty water bottles and sail over 80 kilometers of shark-infested waters to get to Cuba. No, yeah. They get on them to come to the United States of America.
One of the many reasons I love speaking to you is the colorful imagery that always comes along with talking to you, Brian. I can't thank you enough. Right, we've covered a lot of ground here today. I gotta thank you for being on the show and throw your 2 cents in the vault. I want to thank all our listeners for listening in, and I definitely want to thank all the good people that have saw fit to make contributions to our Patreon account. Thank you for enjoying this week's episode of Behind the Vault. All right, this is Mark Morelli signing off, and Brian, thank you again for being here. Love having you.